Is from the Film Society of Lincoln Center, and welcome to the 50th New York Film Festival. Welcome to the Eleanor Bunin Monroe Film Center. This is a really exciting night for us, and it's a night I've been looking forward to for a while because we have two terrific filmmakers who are showing new work here at the festival. We'll have Sally Potter with us in just a moment, and then at 8 o'clock I invite you to stay in your seats. There'll be about a 5-10 minute break between the two talks, but after this talk at 8 o'clock we'll have Christian Mungiu. If anybody has seen 4 months, 3 weeks and 2 days or Beyond the Hills, Christian will be here at 8 o'clock to talk with us, so looking forward to that. Welcome to those who are watching right now live via YouTube. These events are being streamed live on YouTube, and you can watch them after the fact as well at filmlink.com. We have a partner tonight, and we're thrilled to be working with our friends at IndieWire. So I'd like to invite down to the stage now the guy who will be moderating this evening's conversation with Sally. And just a reminder that Sally will be with us for about a half hour, and then she's got to run to another Q&A, and then at 8 o'clock we'll have Christian Mungiu, so stay in your seats. Please join me in welcoming the lead critic from IndieWire, Eric Cohn.
Thanks, Eugene. Thank you to the Film Society for letting us be a part of this event tonight. A lot of the films that we pay attention to at IndieWire are from first-time filmmakers, and they're about discoveries and sort of looking for that new talent that we've never seen before. But the filmmaker we're going to speak to tonight is one of those filmmakers who comes from the other end of the spectrum. We already knew she was great at what she did, but it was great to have a sort of reaffirmation of that talent apparent in the film that we're going to be talking about tonight, Ginger and Rosa. I was at the first screening at the Telluride Film Festival. I don't think at that point in time anyone really knew what to expect based on the other films she'd made. And I was really, like everyone else in the room, truly blown away by the creativity on display. Please join me in welcoming Sally Potter. So this is a film that takes place during the early 1960s. It's a sort of coming-of-age story in a relationship between two young women in their adolescent years. But it's also a film that's very much about its time, about the early 1960s. So what was it specifically about that era that appealed to you so specifically?
I think 1962 is not yet the 60s as we stereotypically think of them, the years of peace and love, flowers in your hair, sexual liberation, political revolution. But it was no longer really the 50s as we think of it, the long Doris Day moment of domesticity and nest building after the horrific years of the Second World War, in Europe at least. So I think 1962 therefore was a transitional moment where people didn't know what was coming next. Not only that, but it was really the climax of the Cold War years, reached their climax exactly 50 years ago this October, in October 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when many people felt there would not be a world at all, let alone the heady years of the later 60s. So to set a story of personal crisis, a family breaking apart, relationships under threat, moral and ethical issues about love, based on love and longing, religion and so on, at this time when other things seemed to be coming to an end, while the world itself seemed like a fantastically vibrant, fertile mix.
Now, even though the first thing that we see in the film is in fact a nuclear blast, it's not a film that's exclusively about what was going on in the larger world at that time. It is very much an intimate story, from the relationship between these two girls to just visually the film is littered with all these close-ups and very intense monologues and tearful exchanges. It feels like a very personal movie. To me, it felt like your most personal work since the Tango Lesson. And so I wonder, generationally speaking, was it a film that you only related to because of what was going on in the world, or was there another element in the sense that there was something autobiographical going on there?
It was based kind of on the premise that we live in the world, but the world also lives in us. the way that most people can relate to a story is through something incredibly personal, through the unadmitted, often secret lives, joys, longings, sorrows that we carry within, and to see those somehow mirrored or illuminated on screen is a way of getting also to know ourselves. Sometimes it's hard to relate to the bigger picture, but I wanted to try and find a way of making them kind of inextricable, the bigger world and the so-called smaller world, which feels huge. You know, our personal lives feel huge. And so its intention was entirely personal, and to give it that authentic and raw and sort of both painful and joyful feeling, I did draw on elements of my own experience and experiences of friends, and things that I could observe and could remember or half remember. And then in the way that scripts evolve, they become their own world. But I wanted to enter into this world that I was creating and get to know it and get to know the characters with as much naked intensity as I could find, as if I was stripping my own soul bare. But the characters that I was inventing and in that process became very, very real to me, and then when they were cast became even more real. So to answer your question about autobiography, it's as if the film itself has become part of my personal history now. I remember the characters and what I've lived through them in the process of writing them.
Well, and the ideas are very potent as well. I mean, not outside of these two young women who are the main characters of the film, there's also this father figure to Ginger, who's played by Alessandro Nivola, and he's this intellectual who has, on some level, allowed them to see the world in a different way. In other ways, he may be leading them towards paths they don't quite understand yet. And when I was watching that, I was wondering if somebody's writing about this character and how they understand the world from the perspective of a character who hasn't fully been able to understand if that's a good or bad thing. You know, where do you fall on that spectrum, or have you changed over the years in terms of how you feel about some of the ideas that this man espouses?
I hope I've changed over the years. But I feel that as a writer, as a director, actually, it's not my business to judge the characters, but to be true to them and to try and understand them. So my views about what Roland played so courageously by Alessandro Nivola does, in a way, secondary to my understanding of the contradictions that exist in all of us, but his play out in a certain way. Alessandro, when he talks about the character, sometimes says that I managed to put truth into the words of an untrustworthy man, and that's kind of partly what attracted to him. And I think it's the tension between sometimes what people think and what they actually do, what their self-image is and who they actually are, and that kind of gap. And they go diving into that gap and exploring it, which is the dangerous, dangerous ground, where we don't really know what truth is anymore, is exciting dramatically. And to then have a character who is doing difficult, dangerous things in the world that exists, but is also loved and loves his daughter and is loved by his daughter, makes in a way, the complexity of the grey area that he's occupying morally and ethically even more, let's say, interesting and edgy, and I hope makes us want to understand where that's coming from, because this was a time of exploring, of ideas, of free thinking, of questioning the nature of family and of monogamy itself and what was okay and not okay. And I tried to write things into his mouth that I often agreed with, even when I fundamentally disagreed with what he was doing.
Well, the other source of ideology in the film is this character portrayed by Annette Bening, who's sort of the early stirrings of the women's rights movement during that time and opens up Ginger's eyes to a different side of the world. But it's one thing that's left kind of ambiguous in the film is whether or not that's actually a hopeful thing, that she's actually being led in a direction that's promising. I mean, we can go look in the history books and figure out that there were some good developments that happened afterwards, but in the actual film, we're left in a state of not knowing if this is going to play out right. And when you go back and you create a character who's filled with that kind of hope, do you see it as something that was a valid way to feel during that particular point in time?
Hope's a big word. Sometimes a dangerous word in script writing, because it can lead you by the nose towards a sort of fakery and a kind of sentimentality. Defeatism is, though, however, probably a worse word. So I would much prefer people to leave the cinema with a hopeful feeling, but you sometimes get a hopeful feeling by watching something that you know is true, even if it's really tough, because it's like bearing witness to how difficult something is. The hope comes in the story through the fact that Ginger, the central character, who is apparently the victim of, in a certain sense, really difficult things, cruel on a personal level, however, has a tool of transformation, because she, as a young woman, is when things get tough, gets out her little book and writes a poem. So she's got the means of transformation at her disposal. She cries when things get tough. She's physically processing grief and difficult things. So who's to say at the end of this particular story is the one who's come out of it worse? She has a way out. There is hope. She's able to achieve detachment over things that are hard by processing them and by transforming them through her young poems. Whereas Roland, who's done the difficult things, and whose worst dread and worst memory is having been imprisoned for his beliefs as a conscientious objector, has created a prison by his own actions. He has, in a way, doomed himself. He has no way out. So when one starts to look at who's suffered and who hasn't and where the hope resides, maybe it's not quite where you expect it. Annette Bening's character, for me, brings kind of clarity, humor, directness, and a kind of adult, honest sensibility into the story that is refreshing in a world where some of the grown-ups don't really want to grow up. They're the ones that are coming of age, actually, not the teenagers who are living and growing in a different way. But I think that the adults, maybe many adults at that time, didn't really want to be adult.
Well, so let's go back to those teenagers and talk about the casting decisions you've made, because they are somewhere near the age of these characters in the film, and so obviously they don't have any real memories to draw from. How much of that era did you need for them to understand in order to play these characters?
Oh, well, first of all, I think you can be 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. You can be 8 and already have memories to draw on. You know, within the scale of your direct experience, it may be very, very different, but a young person, a child, is often incredibly underestimated in terms of what they have already lived and experienced. And but, you know, Elle Fanning, the extraordinary, wonderful Elle Fanning, was 12 when I met her for this role, to play a 16 going 17-year-old, and 13 when she played her, and clearly had grown up in you know, Los Angeles, and was playing a London girl in this absolutely different milieu. But she's an actor, you know, and she was able not just to draw on some things in her experience, but most importantly to imagine what it might be like for somebody else having those experiences, and then step into those shoes, step into that skin, make this extraordinary kind of flying leap into experience that wasn't directly hers, but which as a human being, albeit a young human being, she could imagine and could evoke in an incredibly mature and sort of transparent way. It was very, very, very beautiful and impressive to work with somebody both so open and so skilled at such a young age in years, but who's able to draw on and recognize the richness, the wealth of her own experience and imagination.
So were there films or books from the era that you had her pay attention to? I mean, what sort of literal guidance did she receive in that regard?
I showed her some documentary stuff and some pictures and some images, but that, in her case, I don't think was particularly the way in. I mean, the most important thing of all was the script. So and her ability to read and understand a screenplay, to read not only the words she was being given to say, but the things that were not being said. To understand a stage direction and what was behind it, her understanding of subtext. And then we talked about this character. We tried on clothes for this character. We built a relationship with each other, probably most important of all. I wanted to try and create an atmosphere of trust and safety in which she could be free, and to draw out the very essence of her desire to perform in a true way, to draw that out with respect and in a kind of force field of attention. So I was doing all that, and she was drinking it up and coming towards me. So we met in the area between us with the intensity of colleagueship that is a director-actor relationship at its best. And she was, in my experience, she was one of the most inspiring actors to work with that I've ever worked with, and a delight as well as a human being, and herself in the cusp between childhood and adulthood. So, in between takes, she could sit on my lap, or we could giggle or whatever, and then we'd dive back into the work, with absolute seriousness of intent.
Well, it's interesting because I think in some ways the collaboration mirrors some of the success you had with Tilda Swinton in Orlando, which premiered at the Venice Film Festival almost 20 years ago now. And I think both of that film and this film are essentially about shifting identities, about people exploring different ways that life can allow them to be who they want to be in a particular moment. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why that theme is so alluring to you. It's certainly something you can find in all of your films on one level or another.
Shifting identities.
Sure. I mean, if you look at Rage, for example, you have male characters playing female characters and so forth. So no matter what form the film takes, it always seems like there is something about people trying to figure out exactly how they fit into the world around them.
I guess I tend to think that most identities are illusory, that we kind of cling to them and cling to an image of who we are and what we are. And on the whole, I think identity is there to be thrown away. And it's much more interesting to pursue a kind of essence, something much more indefinable, and not in a way hide behind identity. In a way, so exploring fluctuating identity, or a kind of almost metaphysical essence to a human being that goes beyond any of the many identity categories, is an elusive and fascinating area to explore, and perfect cinematic material, because with cinema you're always exploring what one artist called the mystery of appearance. You're putting so much attention onto the surface of things, the details of things, the design, the makeup, the hair, the look, the light, the color, the shape. You're looking all the time and listening at this exterior, precisely in order to reveal something that you can't see and can't hear, something beyond it, something mysterious. And it's as if the more work you put into the way things look and into these identities, these floating and shifting identities, the more you evoke something that we all know we hold inside but can't touch, can't feel, can't see, and can rarely express.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to leave room for some questions from the audience, but first of all, I think it's important to talk about the kind of attention this film is receiving. We're heading into the fall season, and there's Oscar buzz, and there are all these other things that are going on, which for a film like this is pretty great. I mean, if you look at your last film being shot on a cell phone, the other one that was shot on iambic pentameter, you're not always going for that kind of audience or that kind of exposure. And I wonder if, you know, this is maybe a more exciting direction for you, or are you trying to sort of find your groove in different worlds at different points in time, or what's the agenda that you have as a filmmaker at this stage?
Is that I never have an agenda, but you know, I'm working in a field about mass communication, and the desire to be accessible and to communicate, to reach out, is absolutely omnipresent, including, you know, cell phones at the time. Well, and now it's hard to think of somebody who doesn't have one in their pocket, so it's not necessarily a minority taste, but with this film, I very, very consciously set out to write something and to make something that wouldn't have anything in the way. You know, it's this word naked again. Wanting to make something that's almost transparent, so you almost feel you can see through it, that you can see into the characters or through the film into your own life, you know. And that meant removing, in a way, my ego as a filmmaker from the whole recipe. You know, I do things a certain way. Who is this I, and what is this certain way? Chuck it. You know, just do what's necessary to tell this story. That was my goal. So anytime I felt like an aesthetic or artistic sort of habit or tick or familiar way of doing something come up, bin it. Be direct. Be simple. Film what's there, you know. Follow the essence of the thing. Make the priority. And I tried to make it through always this central character of Ginger that Elle manages to embody with such grace. She was the axis of every scene. The story is told from her point of view. And although as a writer I tried to imagine myself into the skin, into the shoes of each of the characters, nevertheless the story is told through her eyes and through her experience. So using that as a premise, and a simple one, I allowed myself to fall back in love in a way with the simpler and yet hard elements of cinema. You know, how to tell a story, how to make a character that feels true, how to propel us through something simply and directly that people might be able to relate to.
So we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. We ask that you wait for the microphone to get to you, just so we can record it.
I was curious, what was the major reason why Ginger always cried when Roland paid attention to Rosa?
I think most of us wouldn't feel too great if our father was paying a lot of sexual attention to our best friend. I think tears are a legitimate, normal human response to that situation. And I think it's a sign of Ginger's, if you like, emotional health or connectedness with herself, that it's a tear comes out of her eye when she sees something that doesn't feel right, but for which she has no language. She doesn't feel entitled to feel that there's something wrong, because she's growing up in a milieu where it's kind of okay. You know, there isn't a strict moral code to adhere to say that this is wrong and this is right. So she can't express it, but she can feel it.
Other questions?
From what you said last night after the screening, I gathered that you had felt a connection with Elle pretty shortly after meeting her. Can you talk a little bit about the process of building a relationship with her, and also her creating the character and herself in the character, and utilizing improv in that process?
Well, it certainly wasn't hard to make a connection with Elle. When I saw her first audition, I was already blown away and flew pretty much immediately to LA to meet her. I'd been introduced to her by Heidi Levitt, the casting director there. And when she walked in the room, we kind of flung our arms around each other pretty much immediately. And then I worked with her straight away on a couple of scenes in depth. And I was astonished and gratified by her absolute lack of resistance to directorial notes. Any director will know what I'm talking about. Maybe you are one. When you work with an actor, what you kind of want above all, what you dream of actually, is that what you can give to them, they will take and run with and sort of eat it up. And then you begin to get this feeling that you can kind of go anywhere with them. And that was the feeling I had with her. And she worked incredibly fast with notes. So between, did a couple of takes on a couple of scenes. And by the second take, she was like 100% more interesting than the first one, which was already really, really interesting. And it was a incredibly warm and wonderful professional experience, and I also warmed to her enormously personally. She was lovely and open and charming and sweet and delightful and very relaxed with the camera and hungry to work with a kind of deep seriousness, combined with this youth. Everything about her was exciting to me, and it was an instinctive feeling. When I'm on a long casting search, and this was a very long casting search, you can get excited by people, and it's kind of interesting. And when you meet the right one, I've come to notice a physical sensation that I get, a slight fluttering in my stomach, and they do say there's a brain, in the stomach, and I kind of feel it working. It's like it all goes on some kind of wonderful alert. Sort of excitement, trembling kind of excitement, And I had that with Al, and it proved to be an absolutely accurate instinct. It flowed and worked really fast. And she met the character that she found on the page and that we began to talk about. And also she has an understanding, as all the very best actors do, that in the way this idea of character is kind of a red herring too. What an actor is really dealing with is presence, a state of being, the experience of this person that they're embodying, not exactly pretending to be, but in the process of becoming. And to get that feeling of presence, you have to know how to come into the present moment, so that you then take the hand of the audience into your present moment. So that means technically for the actor, not thinking ahead to the next line or behind to the last one. You can anchor your awareness in all of those things. But most importantly, you have to arrive with a very real impulse into your now. And Elle has that quality in her, in life and in work, of now. I am alive now. And she brings that into the shooting experience. And everyone responds to that. Robbie Ryan, the DP, responded to that. Everyone on the set responded to that. And I was in love with that.
We had a question here.
So I've been always enjoying your work, following your work. And this question, actually there's two questions. One is, as a filmmaker, can you share with us a little bit about your process of writing the script and also actually shooting? Do you actually flow in between, like you have a framework of the script, and then when you meet with characters and then you work with the details? I mean, that is always very interests me in terms of how you're able to work in such an in-depth transition between scenes and emotion in each work. So that's one question. The second question is about, I found that lately your work in terms of casting, there's more and more American actors in your work. I'm curious in terms of that decision, because I know that you're based in Britain. So how that work with American actors change your work, or you find that is part of the reason to do that?
Well, the first part of the question about writing and the transition into shooting, I mean, one thing I've absolutely learned over the years is that you have to take the script as far as it can possibly go. You have to develop it as far as you can go before you even meet another person. And then, which means writing, rewriting, imagining, and what you're trying to basically get on the page is the finished film. You're trying to watch it in your head, the finished film, and write it down, what you see, what you hear, as accurately as it is possible to imagine it. So it's like a kind of jump into the future to an end goal. This is the film, here's the description of it. That then becomes the Bible that every single person in your team is going to refer to again and again and again and again. And anything that you haven't worked out will come to haunt you. So you take it as far as you possibly can. That means tons and tons of rewrites. And then during the process of development, I keep rewriting because I keep learning new things that I hadn't noticed, things I'd papered over, I didn't want to realize I hadn't quite got right. Or once I've cast a part, it doesn't quite fit that individual actor. And I think to work on the screen, sometimes you need to adapt the writing to the actor a little bit, so it feels like it fits like a glove, and only that actor could play that role. And then the writing actually goes on in the cutting room because you've shot everything, you put it all together, and you realize, oh dear, that bit doesn't work. So you're rewriting through the cutting room process all the way up until the end of the final mix, because even when you're in the mix, you hear something, a line, no, and change it. So writing and shooting in that sense become indivisible, but they have to, and editing, but they have to be based on something that is absolutely written first, or it will come to haunt you later. On the question of American actors, cinema, and again, this is something I've learned over the years, one is working in an international medium. To be overly parochial or nationalistic or sort of xenophobic about who you're working with, behind or in front of the camera, massive mistake. People working together from different nationalities feed each other, help each other, break each other's national habits, keep each other on their toes. And when casting, I don't look at the passport. I look at the individual and what they can bring to this role, or what I can bring to them, what we can bring to each other, and take it from there. And of course, there are lots and lots of wonderful American actors, and it's been a joy to work with them, as it has been to work with the English actors, the French, the Argentinians, the Russians, and the various other people that I've worked with on both sides of the camera. So I think choices must be made that are right for the project. The project must lead the choices. And when you bring a group of people together on both sides of the camera, you're making a kind of alchemical mix. You're putting, it's this great cauldron of identities and energies and ideas and personalities, and you hope you're putting them together in such a way that will come out this thing that is simply right.
So unfortunately we're out of time, but things fly by when you're having fun. If you didn't see the film at the festival, it opens in New York relatively soon. What's the date? Somebody tell us. Next year. But you'll have an opportunity then. It is screening tomorrow night, so you can see it then. Thank you, Sally, and thanks everyone for being here.